nationalist greetings to everyone who's here with us today, and welcome po sa ikatlong araw ng anniversary special of the Institute for Nationalist Studies, From Peripheries to the Seas, Reclaiming Our Narratives from Colonialism and Imperial Hegemony. I am Kiara, and I will be your host for today's event titled Towards a Decolonial Rhizome, a workshop on anti-imperialist methodology. Ang event po na ito ay handog sa inyo ng Institute for Nationalist Studies along with our partner organizations, Rise for Education Kisay, Rise for Education Alliance, Concerned Students for Justice and Peace Metro Manila, and National Union of Students in the Philippines. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikiisa sa INS. Pero bago po tayo formal na magsimula, narito lamang po ang ilang mga reminders for us to ensure a safe and smooth conduct of our event. First, please keep your camera and mic closed at all times unless you are requested to do so by the speakers, the hosts, or anyone from the production team. Please do not record in video or audio any part of the event to respect the speakers and other participants and their privacy. Please also do not take any screenshots of any segment of the event. And lastly, there will be an open forum after the speaker's presentation, so you may reserve your questions until then, or you may also send your questions and comments here in the chat box in Zoom. You can also inform our team if you wish to unmute during the open forum for a more organized queuing system. Again, pakatandaan po natin ang mga reminders na ito. And of course, you can also use our official hashtag, #1NS, to share your thoughts across Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Pero tungo tayo sa main event natin ngayong hapon. So this workshop is going to be an extended discussion on post-colonialism and decoloniality. So earlier today, I believe if you also have participants who were able to attend our forum earlier, we discussed the potentials and limits of post-colonial theories and the general theme of decolonizing knowledge. And I believe na equally important para sa atin to go back to the backbone of knowledge production, which is the iterative process in itself of data gathering na merong pro-people orientation. So nandito po yung mga paglubog natin sa mga komunidad at pangungonsulta sa mga personal at konkretong karanasan ng mga masa, and of course, ang ating pakiisa sa kanilang pakikibaka tungo sa mas malayang lipunan. And para po palalimin pa ang ating discussion hinggil sa anti-imperialist methodology, makakasama natin ngayong hapon ang ating speaker na isang instructor mula sa Departamento ng Filipino at Panitikan ng Pilipinas sa University of the Philippines, Diliman. Bilang bahagi ng Save Our Schools Network, nagsisilbi rin po siyang guro sa Lumad Bacolod School at sa kasalukuyan ay parte rin siya ng Congress of Teachers and Educators for Nationalism and Democracy, or CONTEND. So everyone, please join me in welcoming our speaker, Sir Jose Monfrensi. Let's all give him a virtual round of applause. Magandang hapon po.
Ayan, magandang araw, magandang hapon, Kiara. Sige, magandang hapon sa lahat. Ayan, shinare ko pala doon sa sa ating chat yung gagamitin kong presentation, given na bawal mag-screenshot, and I understand that for security concerns. At least meron tayong pwedeng yung magamit, no? Pwedeng ma-check out after this event. Sige, I'll just be sharing my screen. Actually, misnomer yung title na nandoon sa publicity material, no? Because supposedly, I'll be presenting with another scholar, no, na may different topic naman related to decolonizing methodologies and research. Unfortunately, ako lang yung available at this time, no? Pero to the displeasure of some people who were expecting a bit of Deleuze and Guattari sa presentation, I'll be focusing less. Actually, I won't even be mentioning the Rhizome or any Deleuze and Guattarian thought. I guess tangential lang in my presentation, because I'll be focusing on emancipating methodologies and research, particularly on anti-oppressive, decolonial, and anti-imperialist research. And I'll be sharing from my experience as an instructor sa research writing classes sa UP, and my experiences as well as a researcher who is trying to arrive at that point, no, na ma-emancipate yung methodologies ko from the imperialist academic hegemony. Of course, I'm not claiming any hegemony myself doon sa aking i-discuss sa hapon na ito. And definitely I saw other faculty members and researchers in our audience, and dito si Professor Regs, si Professor Doris, and dito rin. No? So maybe they could also share if they want to sa kanilang experiences in quote-unquote emancipating their methodologies. Ayan, so let's start. Ayan, nakita naman ng lahat ng yung screen, no, na sinishare ko. Ayan. Sige, so what to expect from this presentation? For the first part, I'll be discussing first what isn't decolonial, anti-oppressive, or anti-imperialist methodology. Basically, what is research methodology under the current academic regime, no, or intellectual regime. And after that, i-connect na natin siya dun sa theory ng decoloniality. Kanina, narinig natin yung critique ni Sir Bomet sa post-coloniality, di ba? Narinig din natin yung critique ni Professor Sarah tungkol sa decoloniality. So now, let's try to summarize that, I guess, to look at how the decolonial theory can actually be emancipatory and anti-imperialist. And after giving the frame, no, sana short lang discussion dito, we'll be discussing what I think are the common principles among anti-oppressive, anti-imperialist, and decolonial researchers. No? Kasi as I will share mamaya regarding the concept of pluriverse, napakarami. There are so many alternatives and it would take days, no, of workshopping to understand each of them. But in the next part, I'll try to give a quick sweep of what could be done. And again, hindi to comprehensive. Again, there are so many alternatives to the current research methodologies taught in universities and schools in the mainstream. Pero maybe some of you, I know that we come from different fields, baka pwede tayo makapick up from some of these. And maybe later, during our open forum, we could discuss some of these methods in depth. Okay? And then next naman, after discussing those methods, I would like to share my own experience of trying to be an anti-oppressive and anti-imperialist researcher by sharing my most recent study, no, with the Lumad Backwit School na gumagamit ng ilang methods na discuss natin in part 4. Alright? So ayan. So now, let's discuss what isn't anti-oppressive methodology. Ano ba yung mainstream methodologies na patuloy na challenge ng napakaraming scholars across the globe, particularly scholars from the global south, which might I remind everyone, no, includes India and the Philippines. Before discussing this, no, siguro konting refresher lang dun sa mga ologies, because some of them would appear throughout the discussion, no, yung parang masasabi natin quote-unquote guiding philosophical principles when we do research. No, we have ontology, which involves what we can know, no, ano yung pwede nating mapag-aralan as researchers. Second, we have epistemology, which is basically how we gain new knowledge, no. And then we have teleology, which would be basically the use, no, ito yung utility ng knowledge, or what basically do we do with the knowledge. And these three principles, dito natin ibabata yung ating methodology, which is basically the combination of all of these principles plus the concrete methods that we will employ to to achieve them, no, during our research process. So yung current na intellectual regime natin, I'm sure na-discuss ito kanina nila Sir Bome, nila Ma'am Sarah, but just to summarize, no, we criticize the current intellectual regime as something that is dislocated, disembodied, and engaged in abstraction. No, when we say abstraction, no, we mean na yung analysis, data gathering, even minsan walang material basis, no, o yung abstraction sobrang layo na from the material reality being experienced by people, no. Secondly, especially in Anglo-American school of research, no, talagang merong pagkiling sa mga universal signifiers, no, which sweep over a diversity of experiences, especially from the global south. Well, definitely there are researchers from the global north dabbling with subjects in the global south, no. Many of them, I suppose, ay hindi naman exactly babad, no, doon sa experiences na kinakaharap natin sa global south. Next naman, we have naturality, no. Other terms for this, we have positivism, yung ultra-empiricism, or what we could actually basically call as false objectivity. Ito yung objectivity or these are the instances when objectivity, quote-unquote, is used as a veneer, no? Doon sa pinapropose, sa ina-argue ng isang researcher na definitely may bias, instead of actually arguing based on material realities, material experiences ng people on the ground, no? So, actually yan nakita natin yan ngayon, 'di ba? Recently, especially in the Philippines, na ginagamit yung science as a way of argumenting or justifying the use of face shields, 'di ba? So, ginagamit yung argument ng science, 'di ba? As a veneer doon sa isang political agenda. Next naman, yung rhetoric of modernity, which is basically, and I think nabanggit to kanina, no, the rhetoric of modernity is basically the rhetoric of salvation, which justifies the Western model of power. The Western model of power is basically colonialism. Diba? We need, or the global South, the countries that comprise the colonial enterprise before, no, and the imperial enterprise now. It's as if we need the salvation of the West in order to gain civilization. No, matagal na itong ginagamit, and until now, no, modernity is used as a way of parang putting a benchmark of what civilization must be. Diba? And of course, in order to achieve or reach that benchmark of development of civilization, kailangan natin pumaloob doon sa quote-unquote modernization or modernity ng imperial powers. And this dovetails fittingly with the logic of coloniality. Diba? The logic of coloniality comprises of war, destruction, racism, sexism, all of these inequalities na gina-justify pa even ng some research until today. So basically, it's the logic of injustice, diba, na we feel until today. The Anglo-European global model, of course, would be the model of imperialism. And there are definitely researches until today that justify or work in service of the empire. No, there's so many examples na parang mahirap naman parang mag-isa-isa pa. But I'm sure that in some of your classes, on your discussion sa INS, na nagkikriticize nyo yung ganitong type of research. So how do these trends in the current intellectual regime actually shape the way that we conduct research? So ito, sinasummarize ko dito sa slide natin, no? There is a marginalization of other modes of thought, particularly modes of thought of indigenous peoples, women and LGBTQ, basically the ways of thinking and doing of the marginalized, no? Hanggang ngayon, hindi pa rin siya fully na-integrate doon sa mainstream. Secondly, there is Eurocentrism and Anglocentrism, if not by the subject matter, but by the perspective of how researchers look at the world. Diba? Actually, napaka-basic ito minsan kung paano natin ito napapansin. Just look at our bibliographies. Diba? Kino-comprise talaga mostly ng Anglo-American researchers who receive dissemination by third-party publishers, third-party disseminators ng publications, diba? Na napaka-Eurocentric and Anglocentric. Thirdly, there exists a reproduction of power structures and injustices in research itself. I think this is something that's quite felt by faculty in universities or researchers who are part of a lab or a team, no? Na kahit sa mismong research process natin, sa research teams natin, may mga sinasantabi mga boses. Diba? Hanggang ngayon, napakalaki pa rin ang galit ko sa idea ng quote-unquote principal authors, no, and secondary authors. As if there are. Diba? As if there are principal and secondary participants in a research. Kung lahat nag-participate, then they're all researchers. They're all co-researchers. Diba? Pero syempre, nagamit yung ganyang rule sa publication, especially kapag, for example, may lab. I'm not sure if mayroong mga scientists sa ating audience ngayon, but there are instances na sa mga lab setups, may mga, yung head researcher or principal investigators ng laboratories, sila usually yung principal authors ng mga research na pinapublish nila, even though they're not exactly or directly involved in the specific research process published in an article or research, diba? So that is actually a reproduction of social injustices outside the academe, inside, no, doon sa research process natin. And this includes, of course, yung asymmetrical relations, not only among the team, among the researchers, but also between the researcher and the quote-unquote research subject. And usually, yung forms nito nagtitake ng hierarchical, feudal, and patriarchal relations. And I guess this kind of system is so hard to overcome as long as universities, academic institutions remain as marketplaces of ideas, wherein research has a price. Diba? Hindi siya open for all. Hindi siya nagagamit ng mas malawak na hangin ng mamamayan, basically. And because of that, given that there's only a margin of society who could access research, most of the time, I couldn't say most of the time, but there are many times that research serves power. And of course, power isn't bad. We want power. Actually, gusto natin ng power, di ba? Para ma-overthrow yung violent nation state, di ba? Pero as of now, yung hegemonic power ay hawak ng national estado. Kaya, talagang ginagalvanize ng mainstream research modes, yung state power. It extends, basically. It extends state power to those who subscribe to research. Pinaka-naisip kong example dito, yung recent lang din na tawag dito. Ayun nga, yung face shield na example ulit. Kung ewan ko nabasa niyo yung mismong paper, pero napaka-weird ng method na ginamit. Actually, parang problematic pa nga, Kasi hindi maayos yung pagbubukod niya ng mga variables sa experiment. But the conclusion is, face shields actually help. It's the only research made about face shields which recommends face shields. And of course, in the Philippines lang. Kasi ginagamit ng Estado as a way of, as some kind of scapegoat or veneer na may ginagawa sila, which is yung pagpapataw ng face shield as a way of curbing the spread of the virus. So that is a way wherein academics, those academics in particular, serve the extension of the power of the state. So so what is our alternative? We could actually try to resort or to explore the possibilities of the decoloniality thesis. The decoloniality thesis, of course, by the name itself, critiques coloniality. And coloniality now is not exactly the same system of colonialism before. Coloniality, as we understand this, refers to long-standing patterns of injustices, hierarchies that define culture, labor, relations among people, and knowledge production. Again, coloniality is not what we experience now because as we have heard kanina, sa mga other speakers natin, what we face now is a global colonial system, a global late multinational capitalist system of imperialism, which continues to mold relations in labor, not only labor, definitely in gender, human nature relations, and other kinds of relationships among people and their physical natural environment. The alternative proposed by some authors, by some theorists who call themselves decolonialists, would be decolonization, which is an acknowledgement and understanding that an imperial power continues to exist and continues to mold relationships and injustices today, diba? This includes thought processes of the study, or the critique of empire through decoloniality includes thought processes of disentangling colonized societies from the economic, political, social-cultural, and psychological damage, continued damage of imperial rule. So, kanina nabanggit din yung post-coloniality, and I'm sure that we have already made criticism against this. Kasi post-coloniality, minimirror niya actually yung rhetoric of modernity. Diba? Just the name itself, adding post as a pretext to coloniality, it's as if coloniality no longer exists in the form of imperialism. Post-coloniality and as an epistemology removes scholars from the concrete experiences of the global south in particular, countries which are under imperial rule, in their research. Kasi pinapaniwalaan mong yung mga bansang ito meron ng kakayahan na mag-develop, through their own modes of modernity. Na of course, as I mentioned kanina, ay pattern pa rin doon sa logic of salvation, sa logic of coloniality ng empire. So definitely the decolonial thesis reneges post-coloniality. In other words, fiction siya. Char. Ano siya, no? Post-coloniality had a good run in the 1980s and 1990s. But right now, no, talagang malinaw, lalo na sa ating mga Filipino scholars or Filipino diasporic scholars, to work not only on decoloniality, but also pluriversality or the pluriverse. No? Basically, to sum it up and to use the words of the Zapatistas of the Chiapas, a pluriverse is where it's a world where many worlds fit. Now, by the name itself, plurality, there's a plurality in the universe. Here, and in talking about the world conceived through pluriversality, we understand our world as a confluence of different alternatives, different strategies of transition, and quote-unquote development. And now I put quotes in development because it's something that we also have to critique, diba? This is a part of the logic of modernity. And this pluriversality of alternatives include something as benign as small everyday actions to broad social movements, organizations, revolutionary actions across the world, particularly in the Philippines and in India, towards a great transformation that spans across a nation, that spans across a country, wherein those activities, those alternatives are brewing, are being practiced. So basically, itong hinaharap kong matrix sa inyo, it's different ways of defining pluriversality in terms of spatiality, wherein we're open to multiple geographies of existence, of experience. We're open to multiple kinds of temporality. And temporality is very important in conceiving the pluriverse kasi modernity is a very temporal na logic, no? Because it assumes that there is, again, some kind of benchmark that we need to achieve, a certain standard of civilization that could be achieved if all countries subsume to globalization, to imperialism. Diba? And of course, diversity, which is at the heart of the pluriverse theory, hindi to katulad ng SDGs, for instance, yung Sustainable Development Goals, or what the United Nations is trying to propose. Hindi to katulad ng human rights, diba, na very universal, na very universal yung pagtingin. We can't have an overarching policy for administration coming from the pluriverse, kasi alam natin in the first place, the nation state is very fraught with problems, diba, in policy making. And so in the pluriverse, we acknowledge multiplicity. Diba? O yan, medyo nag-aano tayo, tangential mention of delusoritarian thought. Diba? Talagang meron tayong multiple trajectories, multiple lines of flight. Although, I guess, makita natin na lahat ng lines of flight na yan ay flight from the current system. Now, all of these are alternatives to imperialism. Alternatives, I think alternative is a very interesting term because it does not only criticize, it does not only critique, but it also proposes something new. Hindi lang siya away ng away, diba? Hindi lang siya nag-expose ng problems. Rather, alternatives already show blueprints of what could happen in a better future, in a better pluriverse, or komunismo, char. Ganyan. So given this discussion, I think it's very obvious that decoloniality and pluriversality and anti-imperialist research is not only about thinking, mga kasama. It requires doing. And Walsh and Mignolo developed this term or combines decoloniality with the term insurgency. Because we have to acknowledge that anti-imperialist action, not only research, is something that is very urgent. And that urgency is, given its resistance to the current system, is a form of insurgency. We confront the current structures, politics, and practices of power and domination, and we also open new paths to arrangements of thoughts, knowledges, theorizing, and thinking that could lead, hopefully, could lead to new constructions of life, new ways of living in a new system. Diba? Napaka-idealist. Hindi naman idealist, napaka-ambitious, Napaka-ambitious talaga ng ating insurgent goal in research. And so, itong pattern na to, itong line of thought na to, no? Critique, research, and action. No, this is some, but I guess this would be the outline of our methodology that we will discuss later on. So, to summarize the discussion so far about decolonizing our imaginations, colonial, imperial, and colonized imperialized thought rests on universals, grand narratives of salvation that we must overcome. Decolonization means overcoming these attitudes, relationships, hierarchies that form discrimination among people and that are brought about by colonized and imperialized thought and ways of doing and living. Imagining a pluriverse means being open and accepting to many worlds in one. No, wherein no universal reigns supreme. No universal because as dialectical materialists, we acknowledge na different experiences, different groups, different communities, different countries, may different strategies that we must undertake, different experiences and realities that we must account for in our research. And finally, and I think most importantly, decolonial scholarship requires action in the field. No? That's why we're moving on to working on the field. No? What do we do in the field? But before that, maybe we could discuss first some common principles that we could extract from a diversity of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, anti-oppressive, and decolonial researchers across the world. No? Actually, napakalawak ng bibliography ng mga researchers attempting this kind of research, and maybe later we could discuss more specifically yung some of them. Ayan. Kung may mga tanong pala kayo or if you want to clarify anything, if you want me to emphasize something, sabi lang kayo sa chat, all right? Ayan. Sige. So yeah, doing anti-oppressive research is a commitment, definitely. If you want to be anti-oppressive, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist researchers, from designing our methodology to practicing it, to disseminating and publishing our outcomes, dapat meron tayong commitment, no? So here, I'll be discussing 10 principles, values, ways of working, in order to, well, not exactly to become, or principles towards becoming, to use another Deleuze-Guattarian concept, becoming anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and anti-oppressive researchers. First of all, and I think the most important, knowledge as a concept, knowledge as a body, as a text, as a discourse, is produced through the interactions of people, and given that all people are located in their own identities, experiences, and in the broader relations of production, with their own biases, privileges, and differing power relations, so too is the creation of knowledge. Ibig sabihin nito, knowledge is political. Diba? Knowing is political. Because some people don't have access to knowing and to different methods of knowing. Diba? Lalo na pag limited yung publications, limited yung research, lalo na pag may differences or difficulties in language, problems in education, literacy, and all of those, that big spate of problems in knowledge production and dissemination. So, knowledge itself is socially constructed. As in, to say it simply, we write, research. Diba? Language is a construction. And so we construct knowledge. Pero we construct knowledge from material realities, or at least we must construct knowledge from material realities, experiences, from people on the ground, from actual relations within different hierarchies, different from the broader mode of production itself, diba? So, I guess that's a rule of thumb, na dapat kilalanin natin na all knowledges are open to critique, are open to expansion, are open to development, diba? But that doesn't mean that a material reality does not exist. Rather, knowledge is our interpretation, our understanding of that reality. Ayan. So, I guess mas practical na yung other principles kasi kanina, yung unang principle napaka ontological, epistemological, and teleological. So, the second principle, which I think is very practical, we must do and support research that challenges the status quo in its processes as well as its outcomes. No? Ibig sabihin nito, pag sinasagawa mo na yung fieldwork mo, pinapractice mo na yung methodology mo in the field, hindi pwedeng inaaway mo yung co-researchers mo or hindi pwedeng nagsisinungaling ka. Oh my God, sobrang no-no mag-manipulate ng data. Alright? Kung hindi mo man nasagot yung research question mo, sorry, medyo nag-a-advance ako pero kung hindi mo man nasagot yung research question mo from what you try to gather from your co-researchers, from your research participants, edi yun yung sagot. Baka mali yung question mo, Char. Baka you can readjust your question, no? Kasi there's something missing. Pero yung mismong quote-unquote data, later on we question the idea of data as well. My God. Data itself, no? Yun na yung, especially if it comes from the people, that's what you have to work with. No, definitely. Okay? So that's the process. No, dapat gibain mo yung hierarchies. If you're part of the research team, walang principal, walang secondary. 'Di ba? If you all contributed kahit one paragraph pa yan, wag naman siguro one paragraph, no? Pero like a part of the research, a part of the field work, 'di ba? They're all co-researchers. Kasi kung alisin mo yung researcher na yan, na secondary quote unquote, edi meron malaking chunk ng research mo na nawala. 'Di ba? So napakahalaga niya pala. Why call them a secondary researcher in your project? Ayan. Of course, outcomes din na dapat mag-lead to something beneficial, utilitarian, no? Yung outcome. Napaka-utilitarian na ng discourse natin. Kasi, again, decolonial and anti-imperialist thinking requires and must come with doing. Diba? Hindi lang puro theorize, mga kasama. Third principle. And I think this is very important to social sciences and to all fields working with people in their research. People are not research subjects only. Diba? Actually, hindi sila research subjects at all. Kasi well, of course, subjectification is a different kind of concept that we could discuss further. Pero kasi pag sinasabi mo research subject, it's as if they're different or hindi sila involved sa'yo, parang wala kang interaction sa kanila. I think a better term would be active research participants or co-researchers in your study. And this will matter a lot in some of the methods that we will discuss later on. Kasi this may not apply to every method eh. Paano kung nag-historical analysis ka, di ba, ng mga text? No, you can't call your books co-researchers unless nagsusubscribe ka sa Latourian idea of network theory, ganyan. But again, that's a different discussion, no? Okay. Next principles. The fourth one, research questions. Again, if you're working with people, your questions must come from the people. I think this is the most exciting, and I hope that this would invite everyone to engage with people on the ground, organizations, individuals, children, women, LGBT, people from the LGBTQ, to marginalize, no? As part of our research. No? And our questions must come from them, must flow from them. Kasi kung sa kanila magagaling yung tanong, it's probable that these questions might actually address the challenges these people, sectors, organizations are facing. Mamaya again, may tayong mga concrete examples of methods wherein we can employ principles 3 and 4. 5, if you can't do that, if you don't involve people in your research or people on the ground, like living people, your question must primarily ask, how do we resist oppression or colonialism and or imperialism? No, and this would apply, I think, more closely with those working on texts, working on discourses. Ayan. 6, ayan, very important to, no? Especially when we're working with people. Relationships within research are not time-specific, not time-bound, no? There is no beginning and end dapat. Walang throwaway relationship, di ba? So kung kayo yung type na mahilig mang-ghost ng tao, wag kayong mang-ghost ng co-researchers nyo. Wag kayong mang-ghost ng communities, organizations. For example, naggawa kayo ng research about, halimbawa lang, no, about an urban poor community. After mo mag-gather ng data, bye guys. O kaya naisip mo na, ay, meron akong critique ng oppression, may critique ako ng development aggression in my paper. Tama na. No? If you're gonna try to make a relationship with these with these researchers, hindi ka dapat tumigil doon sa research mo. Conscript your research, di ba? Conscript your critique of oppression, of development aggression in that paper into action, di ba? Participate as well. If they participated in your research, participate in their struggle. Okay? Number 7, kung kanina sinabi ko na the research question must flow from the people, from the co-researchers. Number 7, basically let the method come from them as well, if possible. No, kasi there are some, if we work with especially disempowered, oppressed and marginalized groups, most of the time they have their own ways of knowing already. Especially when we're working with indigenous peoples, no, they have specific, I won't say methods, no, but ways of sharing knowledge. Mamaya, i-share ko yung tungkol sa storytelling, which is part of my research as well. Yung storytelling, ginagawa yan ng mga indigenous peoples as a way of passing on knowledge to the next generation. So, possibly, this could be, this could be a method that you could learn and employ in your own research. No, siguro, kung nag-work ka naman with artifacts, artworks, for instance, performances, text, there might be methods that actually come from those as well. No? Mamaya may didiscuss ako dito tungkol sa participatory art. So sa mga researchers dyan who are also practicing artists, no? Napaka-exciting na method na to. Basically, to research art, do the art. No? And do the art through a collective, through the organization or through a community or a group. No? So let's discuss that more concretely later on. 8th principle, the language of participation and community benefits show evidence of a shared goal. So when we talk about language, I'm literally talking about the language of writing, the language of designing your instruments like interview questions or workshop guidelines. So yun yung mga research instruments natin, right? So yung language na ginagamit natin doon, basically for principle 8, it must be the language used by the people we're working with. All right. Number 9, we must deconstruct research practice as integrative, holistic, and unflinchingly ethical. Ito na bumabalik yung usapin natin ng ethics. Diba? No to data manipulation, no to hierarchies among researchers, co-researchers, research participants, etc. And finally, and medyo cheesy, no? Medyo cliche na siya. Pero we should have an activist orientation in our research to show concern to the advancement of the rights of the people we're working with, the sector being represented by the artifacts or texts that we are studying, etc., etc. Definitely, ang research natin dapat may commitment to our advocacy. At yung advocacy natin, kung i-integrate natin lahat ng principles ito, our advocacy must not be our individual advocacies, di ba? Kung gusto mo magsulong ng sarili mong agenda, edi mag-ano ka na lang, mag-NGO ka na lang, char, di ba? Pero kung gusto mo na anti-oppressive, decolonial, or anti-imperialist research, di ba? That advocacy must also be the one carried by the people, by the organizations you're working with, no? That you're researching with. Ayan. So yun yung 10, ang dami, di ba? But I think yung pang-10 nga, siya talaga yung nagsasummarize ng lahat ng common principles of anti-oppressive, anti-colonial, and anti-imperialist research. Ayan. So, do we have any questions from the audience regarding these 10 principles? Again, these are the common principles among anti-oppressive, decolonial, and anti-imperialist researchers. All right? Ayan. Kung wala na, baka na ina-absorb nyo pa yung mga principles ito. And again, this is not a comprehensive list. There is definitely more out there being practiced, being developed, new ones as well. Ayan, ito na yung pinaka-exciting, pinaka-paborito ko nitong part. Ito na yung sabi natin pluriverse of methods. I would like to share to you a few methods in different disciplines, and in a while I'll discuss the idea of a discipline and in different fields of knowledge and knowledge production. No, so if there is a pluriverse of alternatives to the current system, a pluriverse of social movements against against the current socioeconomic, cultural, and political system, there is definitely a pluriverse of methods in emancipatory research that could address these problems as well. And they come, and yung pagsasegregate ko in the following slides, come in different disciplines. But I think we also have to challenge the idea of a discipline, di ba? The word itself pa lang, di ba? Kung maalala natin yung pinagsasabi ni Foucault, discipline, di ba? There is limitation, there is an extension, a limitation of power when we talk about disciplines, no? Interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity can definitely overcome this power relation in what we call discipline. So while I do include specific fields of knowledge sa mga slides na to, no, sa different methods, couple of methods that I'll be discussing, let's always try to involve ourselves in interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. Diba? To summarize, basically, when we talk about interdisciplinarity, it means that you try to connect different fields of knowledge. Transdisciplinarity, you cross different fields. No, you don't only meld them, but you create something new. And the multidisciplinarity, multiple fields of knowledge, no, that is practiced usually by teams of multiple researchers. Okay. So for those of you in the field of sociology and anthropology, and anyone who would like to work on social sciences, these are some methods for you. Firstly, we have participatory action research or PAR. Sa PAR, basically, dito nag-a-apply yung ibang principles na binahagi ko kanina. Kasi sa PAR, dapat yung research question mo, literal na tanong ng komunidad, literal na tanong ng organisasyon. For example, an urban poor community asks how they could reorganize or remap. So I guess we'll settle with that. No? How an urban poor community could remap their community in order for it to not be to not be dismantled by a corporation, by Ayala specifically, sa kaso ng San Roque, no? Pero yun, so how do they resist disenfranchisement, demolition and relocation by reorganizing how they spatialize their communities? So siguro this could be a question for PAR, no? Kasi yung tanong mo dapat, yung research question mo ay tanong nila in the most literal and explicit sense. And yung mismong research mo, manggagaling doon sa participation mo, no, as a researcher, as an academic, as a scholar, whatever, doon sa ginagawa ng communities in order to resist the challenges that they're facing. So dito, sa participatory action research, in the example I'm giving, pwede actually ma-involve pa yung other methods like counter mapping, radical geography, as I will discuss in the next slide. But definitely the outcome must be the outcome could be a research paper, sure. But part of the outcome, besides the study, would be a concrete alternative to the challenge that they're facing. For example, sa example na binibigay ko kanina, a new blueprint for the urban poor community in order for it to resist demolition. Diba? A way of attempting to map the community into the logic, no, into the logic being imposed by those who want to demolish and relocate those people. So that's one example, no, of PAR. Sa PAR, definitely involved din ang patuloy na pag-focus group discussion and integration with the communities. Actually, I think mamamention ko naman to later, no. Pero for PAR and some of these other methods na we'll be discussing, it's very important that you're not just there in the community to conduct research. What do you mean by this? Basically, I'm kind of already saying to everyone, or encouraging everyone na if you're not involved in the first place, in the struggle of the community, in the challenges faced with the community, or the organization, don't do research there. That's other field. Diba? Kasi how would you know best what action to create or what action to facilitate, not create, sorry. Kasi ginagawa ng komunidad yan eh. What action to facilitate, diba? Or to design with the community, kung di mo sila kilala. So this applies exclusively, most particularly sa PAR. No, talagang, kung mababasa tayo ng mga PAR literature, Kasi sasabihin nila, I'm part of this organization for years. We've been protesting against demolitions for decades. Ganyan. Talagang, maraming examples actually na in my head right now about mga anti-pollution activists sa Global North. No? Marami silang mga par with urban poor communities. So that's just one example. So that's PAR. Next, IRM, or the Indigenous Research Methodology. This is something developed by indigenous researchers themselves. And if there are any researchers here, participants here who come from indigenous groups, shout out sa inyo. Baka bet nyo tong i-explore and i-practice. The IRM is basically if you're an indigenous person, you use or you try to conscript the ways of knowing, doing, disseminating, and understanding in your group, in your in your community, as a way of answering your research questions. No? The method of gathering, quote unquote, gathering kasi may panipi yung gathering kasi gathering is so tawag dito, parang meron kang source, napaka-capitalistic ba? Parang ganon. Meron kang source dyan, so you get it. Suppose na, that's yours. No, you don't gather eh. You integrate yourself. No, it's the other way around. You become part of the data, no, that you're trying to quote unquote gather, and then you analyze the data in order to reflect how indigenous peoples understand the world. And I believe that IRM is not something that could only be practiced by indigenous researchers. Although syempre talagang pag IRM hawak ng isang indigenous researcher, di ba? The power, no? The impact that research could do. Kasi definitely, alam nung indigenous researcher yung kinakaharap na problem ng kanilang community. Of course, that would be the rule, but there are some exemptions, no? Lalo na sa Pilipinas, napakaraming indigenous researchers na ka-work ng mga state agencies like NTF-ELCAC, ganyan. So it's not a universal, no? A universal possibility or probability. So yeah, IRM, use or conscript, learn the methods of indigenous peoples as your own method. Collective autoethnography, if for example you belong to one oppressed group, talagang may ganun, may membership. But for example, if you think that you're part of an organization, a community that is facing a kind of a concrete challenge, no, related to oppression, colonialism, imperialism, collective autoethnography encourages you as a group, as a community, to reflect on your own experiences and to put it in writing. No? This is basically thick description. No? I'm sure familiar kayo sa thick description, ethnography, etc., etc. But here, you are practicing what we call a critical reflexivity. Critical reflexivity wherein you acknowledge that you will not be removed from what you're trying to study. Actually, ngayon ka naalala, natataka ako ba't hindi ko ito na-mention dun sa 10 principles? Or baka na-mention ko, di ko lang na-emphasize yung term. But critical reflexivity is another principle, mga kasama, na dapat nasa research methodologies natin o nasa research natin in general. Why? Never kang magiging hiwalay, never kang magiging quote-unquote objective doon sa pinag-aaralan mo. The fact that, for example, you're part of the organization that you're trying to study. Diba? You're a queer researcher studying queer experiences. Akala naman hiwalay mo yung sarili mo, diba? Di ka naman straight, kumare. Or if you're a scientist, diba, working in a lab, the fact that you have these facilities granted or funded by institutions that may or may not be implicated in some issue or some problem in the globe, diba? That's already complicity. That's already involvement in what you're trying to study. And so critical reflexivity, if we want to practice that in our research, literally sabihin mo kung paano ka involved. Sabihin mo sa scope and limitations. I'm involved in this way, o kaya these equipment, these tools are funded by these organizations that are involved in this issue. Diba? All of the details that you can divulge, that will be part of critical reflexivity. And this, I think, is very much applied in collective ethnography kasi kayo mismo as a group, no, ang nag-analyze, nagsa-self-reflect doon sa inyong mga experiences. I emphasize the collective and collective ethnography kasi may mga nagpa-practice ng auto-ethnography, and sometimes when I read these kinds of works, sobrang abstracted. And of course, it's so hard to invalidate this kind of research. This comes from the personal experience of the researchers, pero parang hindi siya grounded, no? And that's why there is collective na autoethnography. And there are some researchers that are doing this. Ayan. Okay. In geography and area studies, if you deal with spaces and places, you could employ critical ethnography, which I think is a very big part of area studies. When you actually deal with area studies, social sciences in general, when you do your ethnography, when you do your thick description, which again, will never be as thick as possible. Kaya nga ayokong ginagamit yung term na thick description. Instead of looking or gazing at your co-researchers, your participants, as somebody that could be studied as a whole, di ba? Kasi diba sa ethnography, ganun eh. You study the community as if nasa isang bilog sila, to use Bomeng Guillermo's term, nasa isang loob o pagkatayo sila, when in fact, napaka-porous, napaka-permeable ng borders ng isang community, ng isang organization, ng isang sector, no? Hindi siya ever magiging sarado. Ika nga ni Bowman. Ayan. Kaya, yung relationship mo to those people, hindi bilang untouched or uncolonized community sila. Rather, no, you involve yourself in the struggles, in the action, in the activities being practiced by those communities, organizations, etc. Kasi, I think based on what I read, based on what I've used as part of my review of related literature in my studies, may mga gumagawa pa rin ng quote-unquote uncritical na ethnography, no? Na parang tinatry yung best nila. And in my head, no, may mga names na ako naisip. Tinatry yung best nila na sabihin na these people sometimes are not involved in politics. Or this community is not only about the challenges they face, they also practice cultural traditions, etc., etc. Diba? Pag naririnig nyo, ako nakakainis na talaga. Pag naririnig ko yun, kasi it feels like you're saying na their practice of community, their practice of tradition could be removed from the struggles, the challenges that they're facing. Hello, binubura na, no? Ina-annihilate ng current system natin, ang cultural traditions sa maraming communities across the world. Diba? So you can't depoliticize that. And depoliticization is, of course, a part of the logic of coloniality, the rhetoric of modernity, diba? Mabalik tayo dun sa ating tinutuligsa. Yan. Next, radical geography. Basically, you challenge the geographies of domination by surfacing the experiences of space of the marginalized, no? And radical geography closely involves countermapping. One of my favorite methods talaga kasi it's so visual and it's so spatial and it's so participatory, no? Countermapping is basically countering how maps are made, how maps are defined and understood by mapping not mapping just by yourself, but encouraging communities, your co-researchers to mapping how they understand the world, no? How they understand their communities. Sobrang dami kong gusto ng examples na ibigay, no? But this is not a counter-mapping workshop. So maybe for the next time. But later on, dun sa babahagi kong study ko, there are so many counter maps that I will be sharing, no? Itong example pa na nakita niyo sa harapan, I won't go into details kung ano to, pero if you see the map, kakaiba yung scale niya, kakaiba yung projection niya. Diba? Tingnan niyo yung areas ng Australia, North America, etc., etc. Kasi yung projection niya nakafocus sa Africa, wherein most of the data is arranged, is mapped. You know? So that in itself is a challenge to how the current hegemonic or mainstream projection of maps ay nakakiling sa Global North. Diba? Kung naalala niyo yung Google nyo na lang kung di kayo familiar, pero yung problema with Greenland, how Greenland is so big in maps. That's actually because projection, the current mainstream projection in mapping, no, yung quote-unquote official projection, ay nakakiling sa perspective ng Global North. Ayan. So for those engaged in humanities and cultural studies, and again, all other fields naman, malay nyo, magamit ito sa science. I'll explain later on. We could engage in life history and testimony wherein both the data, wherein the text is both quote-unquote data and interpretation. Life history, so ito mahaba Hindi siya may kilang like buong buhay. No? Buong buhay ng inyong co-researcher or participant or yung topic nyo, no? Buong buhay niya. At hindi lang to autobiography or biography. No, you try to contextualize how this life history, is related to struggles around the world or struggles around the country or nation or group, whatever. And another one is testimonio or testimony. Actually, napakaraming gumagamit din ito. Testimonial is something that's being used particularly in South America, among South American research circles. But generally, testimony, basically how eyewitnesses of events, of events in our history, how they would understand those points in history, no? That's already data and interpretation. Nagets niyo ba? Yung makuha yung text, hindi lang siya yung testimony, which is what you're trying to gather, the data that you're trying to gather. That in itself is already the interpretation of the historical event that you're trying to learn about. Diba? Kaya napakaganda talaga itong method na to kasi as much as possible, you silence yourself as a researcher. As much as possible lang. Because again, dapat reflexive tayo eh. May ginawa kang pagtatype, may ginawa kang pagtatranscribe, no? May ginawa kang spell check, which are all interventions doon sa textual data. People's histories, basically history from below. There's so many terms used by people, by researchers, history from below. At marami din tayong researchers in the Philippines trying to do people's histories, like Renato Constantino, sino ba? Si Tet Maceda, ganyan. So people's histories are basically histories from below. A certain period in history described, interpreted, no, by people who are marginalized, but who are experiencing this kind of history. And finally, we have narrative inquiry and storytelling, one of my favorite methods. Narrative inquiry is basically, it basically covers life history and testimony, but storytelling, my God, is such a fantastic method. This allows for a wealth of ideas, no, na hindi mo kinokontrol. Basically, storytelling as a method is storytelling. You go sit around, you ask maybe one overarching question or start the conversation among your co-researchers, among the participants in your study, and let the stories flow. And in my experience, this is the most productive, one of the most productive na methods, no? Kasi, grabe, the stories that could be, that are generated in storytelling could make up an anthology, no? Kasi naparami experiences, and these experiences entangle with each other. No? Especially if the storytellers come from the same communities, the same organizations, no? Napakaganda talaga. And yung napaka-interesting ng publication format ng storytelling. When I read researchers who employ not only storytelling, no, but all of these narrative inquiries, narrative methods, no, binabasag talaga nila yung research paper format. I read a few articles na ang format nila parang interview, no? There are like 5 researchers/storytellers in a research article. Bawat section, kung sino man yung nagsabi nun o nagsulat nun, nandun yung pangalan niya, di ba? And it's in first person. That's a different level of critical reflexivity, no? Wherein you even involve yourself, no? Wherein you explicitly show your readers kung gaano ka ka-involved. Kasi involved naman eh. Diba? Kahit anong gawin nila, kahit mag-third-person perspective kayo sa isang research paper, lahat kayo involved dyan. At a personal level, alam natin yan. Lalo na pag iniiyakan na natin yung research natin. Art and media studies. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina na participatory art, music, theater, and dance. Basically, participatory art as a broad term. Ang hirap niya i-summarize. So, I gave a few points na lang dito, no? You craft research questions with your co-researchers, the community, and the organization. Then you participate in the designing, the creating, the performing, no? And then you let the research partners assess their own work. I've read a number of of articles, talagang ina-apply ito sa maraming mga communities, marginalized communities, groups of people, wherein yung performance nila, the performance itself is the research, no? Kasi it's a way for a community, for instance, to understand the problems that they're facing. So may isa ako nabasang article, I forgot the specific details, no? Pero tungkol sa kababaihan sa isang women farmers, no? This is in another country, not in the Philippines, pero women farmers. And so nag-role play sila, nag-theater sila. Goal lang theater ganito. Una, it's a way for them to understand, to address the challenges that they're facing. Basically, yung pag-marginalize nila as women, yung pagkakam ng lupa sa communities nila. And secondly, it's a way for them, kasi yung performance public siya, so it's a way for them to disseminate their campaigns. O di ba? 2 birds in 1 stone, mga kasama. Hindi ka lang knowing, doing ka rin. And after that, actually the play itself, the role playing itself is already the data. It's already the research, in fact, no? Pero pwedeng magkaroon ng assessment, how, especially pag merong quote-unquote therapeutic or ano ba? I guess may therapeutic na side yung research mo, especially when you're approaching psychological topics. No, maganda talaga may assessment siya. At least based on the research that I have read myself. And the next one is something that we in our research team practice, yung photo, voice, and emancipatory media. I'm currently involved in the program on alternative development of UP. So may ganong research team, a few scholars working on alternatives, working on the pluriverse. Talagang guiding principle namin yung pluriverse at decoloniality. And we're also engaging with decolonial scholars. No? Yung mga kinukot ko kanina, like Kotari and a lot more. And this is one of our current projects since last year, no, to use the photo voice. Basically, when we talk about photo voice and emancipatory media, you let the communities or co-researchers hold the camera, be behind the lens, or use their own local media technologies to frame themselves to show what they want to show to the public. Kasi media pinag-uusapan natin, di ba? So, broadcasted to. And that in itself is the research. They research guided by the media technologies and the research questions you develop with them. Na-imagine ba natin siya? So, yung mismo product nila, it's not a paper, but it's research. Diba? Kung ayaw i-publish na ng journal, na gusto niya pagpasahan, baka mali yung journal, char. Baka nagsasaserve yung journal na yun sa reigning intellectual regime. I have an example here of, I have actually 2 examples here. Yung sa baba, na nag-Zoom conference kami with the community kasi pandemic, and we thought that this would be a fantastic time for photo voicing. Kasi, literally, wala kami sa community. Diba? We just give them instructions on like, what to do with the camera. Like, maybe, like, we gave them a time limit, or parang, not exactly time limit, but like, what we expect sa time, sa length ng work, kasi this is media, diba? Iba-broadcast siya eh. What they could do, the things that they could do, no, open-ended yung questions, open-ended yung possibilities. And they were able to produce their own short documentary. Ang ginawa na namin mag-edit. And to write the short analysis, quote-unquote, of what they did. No? So, yun yung emancipatory media. No? You don't use it, you conscript it. Diba? You facilitate using it. Ayan. Actually, our outputs are available online if you want to check out Lawan on Facebook and YouTube. Nandun yung mga examples ng mga photo voice research na ginagawa namin. Ayan, next one, community archiving. Medyo kukulangan na pala ng time, so I'll be moving forward. Community archiving, ang pinaka-critique dito ng mga non-oppressive, no? Mga non-oppressive researchers ay, what is your theory? What is your framework? The archive is the framework, no? Because the archive is a way of the archives require the community or the archivists to choose to understand, to show, no, how they understand memory, how they understand history, how they understand preservation. So the archive is the framework. Community archiving, lagyan ko na ng community, no, kasi this is a practice being done to store institutional memory, but there are so many ways of archiving. Actually, kahit individual archivist ka, you can still be an anti-oppressive archivist by, for example, trying to archive the papers of an organization. Or if you're trying to archive movements, actions, na fleeting, for example, yung Lumad Bakwit School in my case, or doon sa colleague ko, nung dinidocument niya yung publication na Ang Bayan, which is something that's yung mga past copies inaccessible na or hindi na mabasa. So yung archival, no, yung archival ng publication na yun, napakahalagang parte ng kanyang research, which aims, no, to critique oppression, whatever. Ayan. Sige. Next, for those in sciences, this is something that I have very limited knowledge with, but this is what I engage in my research, because I also do research in political ecology particularly, and digital humanities with Lance, for instance. I'm sure some of you know Lance from INS. Nag-DH kami ganyan. Some examples of emancipatory methods in science, technology, and society. And we can't remove society from the science, diba? Unless gusto mong maging bahagi ng hegemonic intellectual regime. Citizen science is a very interesting and over-encompassing na method wherein you document, test, and develop sciences based on the needs and based on the scientific practices being cultivated on the ground by communities and groups. Diba? Napakaraming siyensya, napakaraming pag-uunawa sa siyensya na ginagawa na ng people on the ground. Isang magandang halimbawa dyan, for example, yung ginagawa na polyculture, agriculture, or agroecology na sinasa-practice ng maraming indigenous communities across the globe, not only in the Philippines. That is science. No, and that is effective science for keeping the land healthy. But they don't call it agroecology. They have different ways of calling their agricultural systems. No, and those different terms may not be part of biology textbooks, of agriculture textbooks, but they are citizen science. So if you're a scientist, diba, try to document, test, and then develop these methods with these communities. Next naman in political ecology and liberation ecology, I give particular emphasis to ecology because it's a science that works within a systems thinking framework. Diba? Pag ecology, lahat konektado. Diba? From issues of pollution to food insecurity to food sovereignty to everything, no? Lahat na nangyayari sa natural environment is actually nangyayari sa social environment. This is very Marxist, diba? Actually, political ecologists and liberation ecologists are Marxists. Part yan ng manifesto nila, part yan ng kanilang research. No? You can't be a political ecologist if you're not a Marxist. Kasi in-acknowledge niya na, going back to historical materialism and dialectical materialism, diba? Natural history is social history. So the social and natural can't be separated, no, from each other. Next naman, DH, which is all-encompassing, diba? Cross-disciplinary talaga siya, and transdisciplinary. I add critical here because not all DH work is necessarily emancipatory. I think something that we could discuss further later on. I see some digital humanists and digital technologists in our audience right now. But if we want to be critical digital humanists, it requires us to confront the issues of digital technology. Diba? What tech giants are doing with big data, no? Or employing critical hermeneutics and social semiotics in our studies, no? Napaka-interesting, although hindi ko pa na-explore myself, no? Yung ginagawang studies ngayon, like critical code studies, how critical computer scientists study code and how code oppress people. Napaka-cool, diba? Then one thing I'm trying to conduct with my classes would be decolonizing metadata. Wala pa concrete term dito. Some people are saying decolonizing art history, decolonizing the museum, may mga ganung trends na lumalabas sa DH circles. But when I say decolonizing metadata, I encourage my students to build online museums. No, online, not exactly museums, but more of like archives. Mas archives sila kaysa museum na may mga exhibit. And I asked them to think about the metadata, no? Kasi when we think about the metadata tawag dito, of these artifacts, minsan mapapansin natin na nakakiling to sa gaze ng Anglo-European traditions of storage, of memory, of history. Diba? Napaka-interesting din. Something that we need to, further think about. Ayan. So yeah, I guess that ends yung pluriverse of methods, no? Yung variety of methods that we could employ. I'm sure there will be more that we could try to explore, pero may lessons na from the field. Doon sa pinaka-recent kong research project would be, pinaka-recent namin, no? And I'll explain why first-person plural yung ginagamit ko. O dapat yung gamitin. Yung Mapakwento project with the Lumad Bakwit School. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a teacher at the Lumad Bakwit School, which is a school for refugee Lumad students from Mindanao. Syempre nakita natin yung struggle talaga nila, no? At yung pakikibaka nila all throughout these years doon sa recent graduation nila, no? A victory for these students. And then this is my research, no? I'm trying to be reflexive here in saying that my research in a way na I'm writing this paper, no? However, talagang closely involved and I consider as co-researchers yung mga kasamahan sa Bakwit School, students of the Bakwit School, and the teachers themselves, no? I won't cover everything in the theoretical foundations of my study, of our study. However, just to give an idea kung ano yung Mapakwento. Mapakwento, or basically story maps, para sa mga Filipino dito. Mapakwento is a method that I'm trying to develop na nagja-juxtapose ng participatory cartography and art making with storytelling, no? Participatory cartography because I want to study space, no? And the question, and the Bakwit School is a liberation geography. No? It's a radical geography given how it crosses different boundaries and spaces of power. Diba? It's very geographical. And we juxtapose this with storytelling. Storytelling is, according to my students, a way of knowing and doing and passing knowledge that they have known since they were kids. Now, it's something that they have practiced with their elders in their communities. And so, it must be part of the research process. Diba? Yung goal ng study na to, not only to research about the geography of the Bakwit School, but also yung outcome, napaka-utilitarian. No? We want the outcome to be part of our campaign sa Save Our Schools Network. And so, what we did ay yung mga outcomes ito. If you see the maps, these are maps. Actually, yung nakakita nyo ngayon talagang different sila. No? May isa parang poster making contest level. Yung isa naman talagang Pilipinas. Diba? And these all challenge how we understand maps. Itong mga maps ito, we shared them to a wider public as part of our build-up dun sa graduation ng Bakwit School. Because we want to show to the public that these children are talented, that they can map, that they can that they have different school activities, no, including these. So naging part siya ng knowledge dissemination ng organization itself, ng Bakwit School itself. But more than that, the research question was developed with the co-teachers, co-members of SOS. No, kinakonsult ko sila and everything. The method, as I mentioned kanina, nanggaling sa students yung malaking bahagi ng methodology. Critical reflexivity, all throughout the study, I acknowledge my positionality as someone involved closely with the project, with the organization. Validation, also very important, no? If you get any kind of data, textual, artifactual, discursive, whatever, photos, media, dapat vine-validate mo siya with the community that you're working with, dun sa field, no? Babalik ka. Actually, nakalimutan ko ba lang sabihin to, when you're doing field, it's not a one-time, big-time thing. Dapat kang bumalik at bumalik lagi. Again, going back to one of our principles, research in the field is not a throwaway relationship. Some ways to describe the fieldwork itself, it's informal. It's not bound by time. Hindi ako nagsasabi na, gawin natin ito ngayon. Hindi. Parang, free ka ba? Tara, game. Or parang, or sila mismo yung magsasabi sa akin kung kailan kami magko-engage in the research process. Diba? Students decide when, what, and where to share. Literally where. Like, gusto mo ba sa kwarto mo? Sa Bakwit School, no? Gusto mo ba sa labas? Anywhere. Questions are open-ended. I try my best to lessen the questions during the storytelling process. Kasi storytelling eh. It's their stories, not mine. But the participants knew me, no, yung involvement ko na nag-exist na before the project itself, which helped no, dun sa processing. And of course, going back to the unflinchingly ethical principle na binanggit kanina, dapat merong consent. And consent includes involving your co-researchers closely in your project. And fruits from the field, just to summarize, medyo na-extend na pala ako, no? Fruits from the field, dalawang bagay, no? We arrive at a geography of the Bakwit School, a counter mapping, not only of the Bakwit School, but of the Philippines. Kasi Mindanao to Luzon to, it spans the whole country, no? A kind of spatiality, kind of geography that interrogates, that exposes the problems, and ultimately criticizes empire. Kasi kaya sila umalis sa mga lupain nila kasi merong imperialistang pandarambong na nagaganap, no, sa Mindanao. At yung kanilang pagpapanawagan sa malayong lugar ay paraan para sa kanila upang makabalik sa kanilang lupain, upang mapabuksan yung kanilang mga paaralan. At matuligsa, no, ma-expose and mag-criticize yung pagkikipagsabuatan ng mga korporasyon sa estado. Diba? And secondly, mayroong utility for the organization. No? And definitely, the artworks are still are still owned by the students, no? Not mine at the end of the day. So supposedly, meron pa tayong mini workshop. Pero nga lang, I think, sobrang tayo sa time, Kiara, right?
Yes. But I think if ever our participants are still interested, maybe we can do this workshop via email if you have the time.
Yes,
yeah,
Kiara.
That's what I would suggest po.
Oo, definitely. Okay lang bang i-flash ko ulit? And
yes.
So if you'd like to take a screenshot, and then if you'd like to, like send me, let's like workshop it. Again, I'm not like the expert in methodology, but I have explored for many years different methodologies in my life in research. So like we could discuss as equals, as peers, kung kamusta yung methods nyo, questions nyo, no? And if you can form this, or if you have any current research that you want to share, you could send it here. No? As yun yung email ko sa baba. Alright? And let's all be anti-oppressive, decolonial, and anti-imperialist researchers. Let's leave Zoom. Huwag tayo sa field. Diba? Huwag tayo sa online lang. Ganyan. Sige. Thank you. Dagang salamat sa lahat.
Maraming salamat po, Sir Mon, for that very comprehensive and passionate elaboration on anti-imperialist methodology. Siguro yung main takeaway ko for this is that napaka-importante for you to differentiate yung co-researchers from the principal or secondary authors, and even yung pagtawag natin sa mga participants natin as research subjects. No? Kasi if you're going to detach them from the entire process, parang we're owning their narrative when supposedly sila dapat yung nagbibigay ng ano. So, we're going to have a short open forum po if that's okay. I think we can accommodate a few questions. But before we proceed, so isip po muna tayo ng mga possible questions natin for Sir Mon. So before we proceed, let me just thank our partner organizations once again. So our anniversary special is also in collaboration with Campus Alliance for Dedicated and Unified Action UP Baguio, UPLB University Freshman Council, College of Engineering and Agro-Industrial Technology Student Council, Anakbayan Nueva Ecija, College of Human Ecology Student Council, College of Agriculture and Food Science Student Council, College of Human Ecology Freshman Council, Panday Sining Romblon, College Editors Guild of the Philippines, UPLB College of Development Communication Freshman Council, Likas Bayan, and College of Agriculture and Food Science Freshman Council. So thank you so much once again to our partner organizations. And at this point, we're opening the floor for questions from the audience. So to our dear participants, please feel free po na mag-send ng mga inquiries and clarifications na gusto nating itanong kay Sir Mon. So pwede lang tayo mag-chat dito sa ating chat box here in Zoom. And you can also request to unmute, so please just inform our team. And we have the first question na po. So the question goes, Based on your research practices as well as experiences with the grassroots, how do we synthesize the ontologies of multiple subjectivities and materialities with the project of class politics, which is praxeologically singular or one? And that's the first question po. There's a follow-up. How do we engage with stands or subjectivities that are, for example, pro-imperialist practices, such as some people in some communities who are pro-foreign large-scale mining?
And right. Thank you so much, Kara, for you the question, and Gary for the very, very, very important question. No, actually, questions. Sige, I'm thinking of where to start But maybe start mo na sa isang experience ko. Although not related to class, unfortunately. Although I'll try to answer that as well. It's regarding gender, actually. Because we're working on, there was a research before about how different indigenous groups in the Philippines address the gender hierarchy. No, so we have like 4 different communities from across the country na mga leaders, no, mga leaders and how they address na ano. It was so crazy. I won't say syempre kung anong community pa. Hindi na sila bubukod. Pero may isang community talaga na my God, as in, feudal mga kasama. As in, no, talagang merong pag-allow ng violence against women as part of their, so may mga ganong problems na kinaharap talaga kami. And what I learned from that kind of, by the way, we call this method, syempre hindi ko nalagay, diba? Sobrang namin ng method. We call this method the people-to-people exchange. Wherein yung discussion, no, does not only involve us as facilitators, but different groups interact and ask each other questions. So in this moment, what we realize is that effective yung ganitong kind of method for addressing that kind of ano ba, hindi naman backwardness, no, pero that kind of contradiction, no. So nag-share yung community nila about their view of gender na we acknowledge na talaga sobrang oppressive. But because they are interacting with these different communities, nagkaroon ng debate, it was so intense actually, na how they argue, not only from what they learn, kasi mga organized to ng mga communities, like they have their own organizations, etc. So not only what they learn from engagements with NGOs, mga taong simbahan, academe, but also from their own indigenous perspectives, no? How women and men should be equal, ganun mga beliefs, no? So because of that, it was very interesting because may mga bagong learnings ang community niyo which as they said before, they'll try to explore and think about, diba? So I think that's one interesting experience, at least, no, from my experience, no, kung paano nakakapag-sublate, paano nag-interact yung different contradictions, paano nagkakaroon ng bagong synthesis itong mga contradictions na ito. But again, I think that doesn't exactly answer the question, but that would be an interesting method to employ, diba? If there are differing beliefs, differing ideologies na sa people you're working with. But how do we synthesize or acknowledge multiple subjectivities, multiple materialities? Siyempre, as dialectical dialectical historical materialist, diba? Doon pa rin tayo babalik doon sa material relations and experiences of people which are part of the broader mode of production, which espouse relations of power, etc., etc. Binibring up natin yan para lang clear kung saan tayo umiikot, diba? And sabi nga ni Gary, di ba? Praxeologically singular ito eh. And I think, and as of now, wala akong concrete basis, like my own research to justify or prove this. But I believe, given that there is one parang material basis that we're all working with, material realities that we're facing, no? There is a possibility to arrive at conclusions, well, of course, not exactly conclusions, no, but like interpretations of our data that actually acknowledge or address the contradictions of such multiple subjectivities. Apply ko na lang doon sa second question, no? Paano yung mga, paano kung ikaw ay isang anti-imperialist researcher and you work with a community sa kanayunan na pro-mining, no? as I said kanina, dapat magaling sa kanila yung research question. Go! Get the research question from them. What do they want to know? Diba? Actually, ontological contradiction na yan. Diba? Like what Gary was pointing out. And then, get the method from them as well. Involve them in the method, help them, or parang be with them in addressing the challenges if there are that they're facing. Kasi, at the end of the day, whatever comes out of that engagement, there is definitely room for critique. Diba? Kasi, that research could actually expose how these people are being oppressed, being disenfranchised by imperialist mining practices in their community, by large-scale mining. Actually, ano yan eh, ito na yung very, I guess, very Maoist kind of praxis na meron tayo, di ba? We acknowledge that the masses have the most comprehensive and most exact knowledge of what they're experiencing, diba? But that knowledge could be diluted, could be manipulated, through ideologies, etc. As revolutionary na pala, nandito tayo sa ibang level ng pagiging anti-imperialist. As revolutionary scholars, diba? Part of our objective is to raise consciousness as well. But we don't raise consciousness in a way that we impose, diba? If we try to synthesize, these contradictions, these multiple contradicting subjectivities and actually unified materialities, experiences. Doon lalabas yung pag-raise ng consciousness eh. Doon lalabas yung realizations. Diba? So it's possible. But again, I'm coming from a more theoretical perspective dito ha. And I believe that this would be exciting. Kasi personally, and I think it's a limitation, that I haven't worked with the community na hindi organized yung people. Organized in a sense that they have an organization, that they're fighting for their rights. Not saying that they're all part of one political movement. No, actually, they're part of different ones. Pero yun, they're all organized. Paano yung mga communities na okay lang talaga? Like, wala silang pake. There are. There are. And we need to raise consciousness with them. No? Ayan, maraming disclaimers. Ayun. So I hope that, gives a good idea of what you want to hear, Gary.
Right. Thank you po, Sir Mon, and I hope that also answers the question po. We have another question from Ms. Gabby. So, for those who have to write up research work as part of an academic program, would you be able to share any of your favorite or recommended practices to incorporate the principles of decolonial and anti-oppressive research within the writing process specifically?
All right. Thank you, Kara, for reading. Gabby, this is a very interesting question because this is something I was thinking about like a few minutes before the program. Kasi actually, I was talking with Lance. We had many discussions about the form, like the literal textual form of research. Na parang ano yung possibilities of overcoming yung nakasanayang anyo, di ba? Pero babalik kasi we're talking about our graduate thesis actually at that time. At babalik tayo sa point na if you're doing research work in an academic program, so I assume you're doing this as a requirement for a class, a thesis, di ba? Part of your critical reflexivity is acknowledging that you're trying somehow, or part of your research must pander, unfortunately, must pander to your panel, to your professor. You're working within an institution eh. Kung gusto mo maging experimental, avant-garde, and whatever, na baguhin mo yung buong format ng thesis mo, gawin mong interview format, gawin mong musical format. My God, I would be so interested in trying to know what you're doing. Pero nga lang, for an academic requirement, diba, baka Mars, diba, di ka pa makagraduate. I'm not saying that we must bow down or like to continue practicing these archaic. Hindi naman archaic. I'm sure marami naman ang nagtatry na magbago, di ba? Especially in the Philippines, in the Global South. Pero if we don't want to replicate them, we just are playing within the system. We are reflexively understanding, kung ano ba yung gusto nating makuha, which is to graduate, to pass, whatever. And also to actually write research. Ibang mundo na, I think, when we're talking about publications, conferences, etc. Because there are definitely publications which are so strict, so archaic. Archaic talaga. sobrang traditional in the way that they want to present research. No? Sometimes there are journals that are not accepting research written in the first person, diba? Which is so something that has been criticized for decades, diba? Pero ayaw nila magbago eh. Fortunately for us, for our generation, there are so many journals, there are so many publications, conferences, fora, and organizations like INS, no, that are open to publishing multiple and multimodal, anti-oppressive, and experimental kinds of research. So we look for these groups, we look for these communities, and we get it as audience. Pero, okay, ito pa rin ito criticism ko rin kasi sa maraming mga intellectual groups na experimental. Yeah, I'm not necessarily talking about the post-situationists, but sige, sila na rin, as an example from Europe, hindi sila open. No, some of these groups are not open to the public. They're not making their work accessible. Actually, mas nilalayo pa nga nila by experimentation. Experimentation must also come from the material reality of the people, communities, organizations we're researching with. Diba? I think INS is a very good example of this. Na I keep getting surprised and shocked and excited. May mga senior high school na nagsusulat ng sobrang ganda mga essays na self-reflexive, no? Bordering autoethnographic, and this is a good kind of essay na I believe would never be accepted as a class requirement. But we have a community that could publish that, diba? Also an experience with us sa content sa Congress of Teachers Educators for Nationalism and Democracy. We explicitly write about the National Democratic Revolution in the Philippines. That's part of our research agenda, and definitely may nangaretag sa amin, definitely hindi ito pa-publish ng mga journals. Well, not definitely, but yung probability, di ba, are slim given the political situation. But we continue to publish, and we're publishing soon, no, a journal regarding this kind of studies na hindi talaga baka hindi matanggap kung part ng academic program. So, ayun, no, hindi ko pala nasagot entirely, no, kasi may favorite and recommended practices. Pero yun, kung usapin ng pagpapasa ng ganitong mga kind of research, we could try, but if it's for an academic requirement, we have to adjust as well. Pero I think if we choose the proper thesis advisors, if we choose the best professors, no, definitely they would embrace the research that we're trying to do, no. Tapos siguro ano na lang din, hindi na favorite para hindi napaka all about me, recommended practices na lang din. But every field you're in, try to be the one in the class or in the group to work with communities. Actually, nahirapan akong i-develop yung list ng pluriverse of methods kasi in my head, ang gusto ko lang talaga i-share ay yung may community involvement, which I think is something that is peak anti-imperialist or anti-oppressive research kasi you're actually working with communities who are trying to address actual problems, no? Pero definitely, kahit textual work, artifactual analysis, magiging part naman din. So, yung mga example natin pinina. Involve communities or involve organizations and explicitly share their involvement. By the way, not an answer but a good reminder lang in relation to being authors. A practice that we in our research group maintains, no. Lahat ng research papers namin, walang solo authors. I wrote a paper, it's not by Simon Fred C, it's by Simon Fred C, Cerebral Network, and the students of the Bucket School. My co-researcher, yung paper niya by her name, Professor Keme Keme, and the women leaders of the AITA group, AITA community. You're all co-researchers, diba? So I think that should be part. Kung ayaw na teacher niyo, ayaw na professor niyo, pilit niyo, bigyan niyo siya ng RRL. Mag-share tayo ng RRL. Sabihin niya, sir, baka gusto niyo itong basahin as a defense for my academic requirement. Sure. Yeah. Salamat, Gabby, for the question.
All right. Thank you po, Sir Mon. And I think po, due to limited time, we're only going to be able to accommodate one more question from our participants. But I hope you can reach out also to our speaker if you have any more questions after this. So this is from Nisi po. So regarding the facilitation of community archives, and hoping daw na makapag-share kayo from your experience with the Lumad Bucket School. So, given that there is a chance that these research projects might not be eligible to receive support from government agencies or private corporations, how do we as archivists sustain these archives and make sure that they last? And where can we go to seek support in reclaiming our memories and histories?
Right. Thanks, Kiara. Actually, yung stutter ni Kiara sa archivists, may ganyang movement, no? Archivist activists. They call themselves archivists. So interesting. Thanks, Nissy. You want to involve yourself in archiving pala. And I think it's one of the most interesting methods that we could do with communities, no? Especially community archiving. For the case of the Lumad Bucket School, actually, talagang zero support from the state kasi sila yung napapasara ng mga paaralan, di ba? But we do get support, financial aid from many private institutions. Private meaning hindi corporate, private like NGOs, literal funding institutions from napakarami niya sa Europe actually. We have a lot, no? We have a lot. So, doon actually nagiging possible yung mga archives. So, ang ganda ng tanong the goal of the archive is to store memory. But what if the archives are forgotten? What if the archives are lost? And I think this is where digital humanities come in, diba? Let's use digital means, diba? But let's not rely on it. What do you mean by this? Let's ensure to store digital copies, digital texts, especially including metadata, no, including where we got them, the date, lahat ng mga yan magmamatter for future research. All of this metadata, we store natin siya online, no? Whether or not public, the fact that it's stored, that it's safe, so siguro kung insecurity, may problem with insecurity, wag sa Google Drive, diba? Prepare in some online storage or some, if not cloud storage, hardware, no? Hardware, para ma-secure sila. But another way, along with digital archiving, would be to exhibit them. No, I'm so interested, although hindi ko pa siya na-explore academically, like of how people visit exhibits and take photos. Kasi it's a way of expanding the archive, no? Na parang, especially sa mga kampuhan, mga picket line, na mga nagdi-display ng mga litrato ng mga rally or ng organization. When people go there, when student activists, no, especially, they love taking photos of all of these pictures of rallies in the past or whatever. That's also archiving. Diba? That's also distribution. Diba? Of course, there might be problems arising from this. Again, something that we must think about further. Pero these are ways of expanding the archive, no? Both online and on ground. Particularly for the Lumad Bucket School project, yung mga mapakwento ko. Sa study ko, mapakwento ng students in my study. We're trying we're testing out different online exhibition websites, I guess, tools like Omika, ArcGIS, knowing story maps nila. So these different tools, and we're trying to look for the best ways of storing the maps online, no, na pwedeng ma-experience, pwedeng makita ng mga tao, no. And of course, we acknowledge that the audience of the digital world, given the big digital divide in the Philippines and across the third world, hindi talaga ito ma-access ang lahat. Kaya yung pag-store and pag-preserve ng mga like actual copies, they're part of archiving, ha? Hindi lang talaga siya yung pag-record or pag-digitize. The actual preservation of the artifacts. Ayun. Thank you, Nissy, for the question. Quite exciting. Kung may mga ganyan kayong project, involved tayo.
Thank you po, Sir Moon, of course, for gracing today's event, and of course, for answering the questions from our participants. And napakaganda ng naging discussion, no? And I think we can relate this as well, especially bukas, tomorrow na yung State of the Nation address ng ating President. And there's going to be a lot of claims, no, ng kanyang mga achievements, quote-unquote. And I think this is important for us, no, to emancipate yung knowledge production natin and to reclaim our narratives, especially with the contradictions in itself. Research is a power struggle. So kailangan we continue to challenge the status quo through utilizing yung mga principles of anti-imperialist and decolonial methods that we also discussed earlier. And of course, on behalf of INS, no, to further express our gratitude po, I hereby present the Certificate of Appreciation to Sir Jose Monfredsi for imparting valuable knowledge as speaker in the workshop Towards Decolonial Rhizome, a workshop on anti-imperialist methodology of the first anniversary of the Institute for Nationalist Studies, titled From Peripheries to the Seas, Reclaiming Your Narratives from Colonialism and Imperial Hegemony, given this 25th day of July 2021. Maraming salamat po ulit, Sir Mon, and we're hoping to have you in our future events as well. And of course, to our participants, nag-iwan naman si Sir Mon ng kanyang email address. So I hope that we can contact them using the email address para to consult regarding our future research projects.
Right.
So, and of course, thank you so much din sa ating mga participants na sumama sa ating workshop today. And we hope to hear from you, all of you, as well as we continue to improve our events. So please make sure to fill out the evaluation form at tinyurl.com/INS-ANID-Day3 Workshop. Nasa screen din po natin yung QR code. So this will allow us to issue your official certificates of attendance to today's event. And of course, special thanks once again to our partner organizations, Sociosphere UPB, Sakbayan UPLB, Gabriela Youth PLM, and our media partner, the UPLB Perspective. And of course, this is not the end of our anniversary special, as we still have a couple of events lined up for the next few days. So on July 27, 2 p.m., we'll be highlighting the geography of imperialism with scholars from the Global South. So exciting po yan. I hope to see you there. And that will be followed by a workshop on digital cartography. So this is going to be an extended discussion sa mga na-mention na counter-mapping initiatives din kanina ni Sir Mon. That's going to be at 4:30 p.m. And to cap off our anniversary events, we will also be hosting a solidarity night with the basic masses on July 31 or 30. We will be posting important announcements of our Facebook page. So please feel free to visit our social media accounts for other information about the speakers. And sa mga interesado na sumali sa INS, of course, as we continue propagating and advancing a nationalist consciousness, and maybe we can also work on these research projects na hindi akma no sa mga case na nasa status quo. You can sign up for an orientation at tinyurl.com/INS orientation sign up form. Once again, thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. And this has been Kiara, your host for Towards Decolonial Rhizome, a workshop on anti-imperialist methodology. And we hope to continue working with all of you using a people's research framework. See you po sa atin pang mga next events.